Chapter 1. The Judge's Laughter. The courthouse in Fairbrook, a town forgotten by time in Alabama, was packed on that sultry afternoon. The windows were barely open, and the ceiling fan spun lazily, unable to dissipate the smell of sweat and tobacco that permeated the room. At the top of the courtroom, Judge Alvaro Montero adjusted his robe, leaning back in his worn leather chair. In his early 60s, with gray hair and refined eyes, he reigned over that courtroom like a king before subjects who never dared to question him. His sentences were swift, his words, law, until now. "And you tell me you want to defend this man?" The judge examined an eyebrow, looking at the young man before him. He let out a nasal, dry, leathery laugh. "Are you old enough for that, girl?" The girl, who didn't look more than 10 years old, had an unusually calm expression on her face. Her dark skin glowed in the dim lighting, and her eyes held a flame the judge couldn't see. She wore a faded cotton dress, her shoes were cheap, and her hair was tied back in modest braids. "My name is Camila Andrade, Your Honor, and yes, I am this man's attorney." There was a heavy silence in the room. Some members of the audience chuckled. In the dock, a middle-aged black man named Samuel Carter lowered his head. Accused of robbing a liquor store, he knew how this court worked. Justice there was swift, ruthless, and delivered in his favor. The prosecutor, John Wallace, a well-dressed, well-built white man, stood aside. "Your Honor, perhaps this young lady doesn't understand the seriousness of this case. I suggest that—" "I know exactly how serious this case is, prosecutor," Camilla interrupted, her voice firm but unruffled. "My client was arrested without a single piece of hard evidence, not a single credible witness, no fingerprints. Just an anonymous tip." Judge Montero sighed dramatically. "So besides being a junior lawyer, you're also a detective?" More laughter echoed. Camilla didn't flinch. "I'm just doing the job that others seem to have forgotten to do, Your Honor." The judge's eyes narrowed. It wasn't common for someone to retort like that, especially someone like her. But he didn't know. He had no idea that this girl was much more than she seemed. And soon he would find out, in the worst possible way. The courtroom was still filled with a silent uneasiness. Judge Montero's mocking laughter still hung in the air, but something in Camilla's posture began to bother those present. She didn't waver. She showed no fear. Prosecutor John Wallace straightened his tie and stood up, taking the center of the room. "Your Honor, with your permission, let us proceed with the evidence that makes this case a matter of simple common sense." He gave Camilla a condescending look. "I'm sure our young defender will learn a lot today." Montero laughed again. "Go ahead, Wallace, we're going to give her a lesson." Wallace picked up a document and walked slowly toward the jury. "Ladies and gentlemen, Samuel Carter was arrested on the night of April 3rd, shortly after the robbery at Benson's Liquor. The owner of the establishment reported that a black man, in a brown jacket and jeans, fled with $200 from the cash register. Minutes later, Carter was found 3 blocks away with a wad of cash in his pocket. Coincidence? The jury murmured among themselves. The prosecutor smiled. "And to back it up, we have this report," he said, holding up a piece of paper. An anonymous tip pointing to Carter as the perpetrator of the crime. He then turned to Camilla, hoping she would lose herself in the courtroom formalities. But she didn't move. Instead, she crossed her arms and smiled. "Are you done, prosecutor?" The room fell silent. Wallace blinked, confused. Yes, for now." "Good. Now, if you'll excuse me, I'd like to ask you a few questions." She walked slowly toward the jury, letting her gaze linger on each of them before turning to Wallace. "You mentioned that my client was found with cash in his pocket. Were any of the dollars identified as belonging to Benson's Liquor? Any marked bills, any registered serial numbers?" Wallace cleared his throat. "Well, there was no specific marking, but the amount was consistent with the amount stolen." "Interesting. What about the brown jacket and the jeans? Are there any photos, any recordings that prove he was wearing those clothes at the time of the crime?" The prosecutor bit his lip. "The store doesn't have security cameras." Camilla smiled. "So, for now, we only have an unsubstantiated report and an anonymous tip. Could you tell me who made that tip?" "Well, It was anonymous, as I said. Exactly. She turned to the jury again. Ladies and gentlemen, we have a case based on 3 elements. A suspect arrested just for being near the scene, an unidentified amount of money, and a report from a person we don't even know exists. The jury's uneasiness grew. Judge Montero frowned. Attorney, what's your point? Camila turned to him, her voice firm. My point, Your Honor, is that my client was arrested based on assumptions, not evidence. Which begs the question, if he were a white man, would the case be so flimsy? The room erupted in murmurs. Wallace went pale. Judge Montero slammed his gavel on the table. Order in court. Camila kept her gaze fixed on him. She had struck the first blow, but she knew that this was only the beginning. Judge Montero would not stand for being challenged, and he would soon show it. The courtroom was slowly emptying after the afternoon session. The murmurs of the audience still echoed through the worn marble corridors. No one expected that this girl, or whoever she was, would have the courage to stand up to John Wallace, and worse, to destabilize Judge Montero himself. The judge remained seated for a few moments after everyone had left, drumming his fingers on the dark wooden table. Something was bothering him. He had dealt with many lawyers over the years, some insistent, some stubborn, but none of them challenged him like that. None of them made him look like a fool. Who the hell is this girl? He muttered to himself. It was then that Wallace reappeared, closing the door behind him. He seemed less confident than before, which only irritated the judge more. Alvaro, that was a joke. The prosecutor dropped his briefcase on the table, loosening his tie. How could we let this happen? Judge Montero stood up, straightened his robe, and walked slowly to a small bar in the corner of the room. He poured a generous shot of whiskey and turned to Wallace. You tell me, that's your job. I didn't expect her to be so quick. Wallace sighed, scratching his head. But there's something weird about it. I checked the bar records last night. There's no one named Camila Andrade registered in Alabama. Montero stopped drinking. His eyes hardened. Are you sure? Absolutely. Wallace took out a cigarette and lit it with shaking hands. I thought it was a paperwork error, so I did a more extensive search. Nothing. No information about her anywhere. Judge Montero was silent for a moment. Something was wrong. Find out who she is, he ordered. Wallace nodded. I've already sent someone to follow her. Let's see where this lawyer goes when she leaves the courthouse. Montero forced a smile, but his thoughts were racing. He knew that power and control were everything, and this girl appearing out of nowhere was a threat, and he wouldn't let that go unnoticed. Meanwhile, Camila walked through the narrow streets of Fairbrook, feeling the heavy gazes on her. She knew she was being followed. She could feel the weight of footsteps behind her, the deafening silence of someone trying to appear invisible. She stopped at the corner of a dimly lit alley and pretended to check something in her purse. Through the reflection of the dusty window of a closed store, she saw a man in a cheap suit standing on the other sidewalk. He tried to act casual, but failed miserably. Camila smiled slightly. She began. She turned right and entered Lucy's diner, one of the few people in Fairbrook she trusted. Lucy, a stocky, middle-aged African-American woman, was washing glasses behind the counter when she saw her come in. You look like you just kicked a hornet's nest, girl. Camila laughed, sitting down at the counter. I guess the judge didn't like me very much. Lucy snorted. Alvaro Montero never liked anyone who talked more than he did. Want some coffee? Actually, I want to know if I can go out the back way. Camila lowered her voice. I'm being followed. Lucy didn't ask any questions. She just grabbed a set of keys and opened the back door. Don't get yourself into trouble I can't get you out of, girl. Camila winked. Who said I'm getting into trouble? Maybe I'm already in it. And she disappeared through the back door. Darkness covered Fairbrook as Camila emerged from the back of Lucy's diner. The alley was narrow, dank, and smelled sour from old garbage. She followed the side of the building, keeping to the shadows, until she emerged onto the parallel street. The car of the man who had been following her was parked there, a brown sedan with peeling paint. Sitting in the driver's seat, a man in a cheap suit held a cigarette, but his eyes were fixed on the alley she must have come from. Camila smiled. Amateur, She crossed the street as if she were just another person returning home, and slipped quietly into the laundromat on the corner. The owner of the place, Miss May, was a tired-looking black woman who barely looked up from her knitting as Camilla passed. "I need to use your back door, May." The woman gestured with her chin. "Close the door when you leave." Camilla slipped out the back and disappeared into the night. In the courtroom, Judge Montero was twisting his ring around his finger, an old habit that always arose when he was irritated. Wallace hurried in, throwing an envelope on the table. "We got it." Montero opened the envelope and studied the photo inside. Camila Andrade in a library at Columbia University, dressed in formal clothes. The stamp on the side of the page confirmed what Wallace feared. She graduated from New York. She's registered with the Bar Association there. A real lawyer. Montero narrowed his eyes. Then what the hell is she doing here, pretending to be someone else? Wallace lit a cigarette. Maybe she's after something. Maybe someone. Judge Montero looked at the photo again. Something inside him told him that the girl wasn't there by chance. Find out everything about her, and do it fast. Wallace hesitated. If she's investigating us, it could be dangerous. Montero slammed his fist on the table. Then make her disappear before she becomes a problem. The prosecutor didn't argue. He simply left the room, knowing exactly what he needed to do, and, that night, Camilla would realize that she was messing with forces much more dangerous than she imagined. Camilla walked quickly through the empty streets of Fairbrook, feeling the humid night air stick to her skin. She knew Montero and Wallace were after her. She knew that if she didn't act quickly, she could be eliminated before she even reached the end of her investigation. She turned the corner and entered the small law office she rented under an assumed name. She closed the door, locked it, and pulled a file from the bottom of the drawer. Inside were weeks of research, notes, and documents that could bring Montero down. But there was one missing piece, something that would directly link the judge to the corruption in the court. It was then that her eyes fell on an old newspaper clipping pinned to the wall, an article about a murder case that had been cold for 10 years. Judge Montero's name was there. At the time, he was just a second-rate prosecutor. She picked up the phone and dialed a number from memory. "I need a favor." In the meantime, Montero didn't sleep. Sitting in his private office, he stared at his glass of whiskey without really seeing it. Wallace was in front of him, looking restless. "What is it?" Montero growled. Wallace cleared his throat. "We found out where she is. Small office on Maple Street. Do you want me to send someone?" Montero smirked. "Not yet. I want to know exactly what she has against me before I act." Wallace nodded, but he looked tense. "Alvaro, what if she already knows too much?" The judge downed his whiskey in one gulp and slammed the glass on the table. "Then she won't see the light of day tomorrow." The Hidden Truth. A few hours later, Camilla was sitting in a roadside cafe waiting. A man walked in wearing a worn leather jacket and an old cap. "You owe me a coffee, Andrade," he said, sitting across from her and tossing an envelope on the table. Camilla smiled. "If what you have there is what I need, I'll buy you a whole dinner." She opened the envelope and pulled out an old police report. Her eyes ran over the lines yellowed by time, and then she stopped. Her heart raced. There was the connection she was looking for, the proof that could destroy Montero. And now everything would change. Camilla held the police report in her hands, but her heart was racing. The paper, yellowed with age, detailed a cold case from 1962. A young black man named Isaiah Carter, the older brother of Samuel Carter, her client, had been found dead in an alley, shot in the back. The police said he resisted arrest. The case was never investigated thoroughly. And who was the prosecutor responsible for the cold case? Alvaro Montero. Camilla felt a chill run down her spine. That was no coincidence. She read the details of the report again. Witnesses said that Isaiah Carter was never seen armed. The officer who shot him claimed self-defense, but his statement was inconsistent. There was no gun at the scene, and who pushed for the case to be closed quickly? Montero. The judge who today tried to convict Samuel Carter without evidence was the same man who years before helped cover up his brother's murder. Camilla took a deep breath. Montero wasn't just corrupt, he was a criminal. Meanwhile, Judge Montero paced back and forth in his office. Wallace stood before him nervous. "We need to resolve this soon, Alvaro," the prosecutor said. "If she finds out anything..." Montero stopped and narrowed his eyes. "She already knows." Wallace turned pale. "How? If she didn't know yet, she wouldn't be hiding. And she wouldn't be alive." Wallace swallowed hard. Montero picked up the phone and dialed a number. "I have a job for you. I need someone to disappear tonight." On the other end of the line, a hoarse voice answered, "Consider it done." Montero hung up and turned to Wallace. "Tomorrow, this lawyer will be just a footnote in the newspaper." The game had changed. Camilla put the papers in her briefcase and left the coffee shop with hurried steps. Her contact, the man in the leather jacket, followed her. "If I were you, I would disappear from the city tonight," he said. Camilla looked at him and smiled. "I'm not you." And she got into her car knowing she only had one chance to take down Montero before he took her down first. The night was thick in Fairbrook. The smell of rain mixed with the hot asphalt and the wind blew hard as if announcing a storm. Camilla drove her rental car, keeping an eye on her rear-view mirrors. She knew Montero was targeting her. She knew he would do everything he could to silence her, and it didn't take long for the threat to come true. As she turned onto a deserted street, the headlights of a black car appeared behind her. At first he kept his distance, but then he accelerated aggressively. Camilla tightened her grip on the steering wheel. It started. The vehicle approached quickly. She realized it wasn't just a warning. They were trying to run her off the road. With a quick movement, Camilla turned the steering wheel to the right and entered a narrow alley. The pursuing car almost crashed into the curve, but managed to follow her. Her heart hammered in her chest. She couldn't be caught. Not now. She accelerated, feeling the engine tremble under her command. The alley ended at an intersection. If she played her cards right, she could lose her pursuers. And then, in the last split second, she turned off her headlights and turned sharply into a dark side street. The pursuing car drove straight on. Camilla waited a few seconds, taking a deep breath before continuing slowly, without making a sound. She had won this round. But she knew Montero wouldn't give up so easily. He wanted her head, and she needed to act before he did. Meanwhile, in Judge Montero's office, the light from the lamp cast shadows on the wall as he sipped his whiskey. Wallace walked in, his forehead sweaty. "It went wrong," the prosecutor said. Montero turned slowly. "What do you mean it went wrong?" "She disappeared." Wallace swallowed hard. "The car followed her into an alley, but she fooled them." The judge took a deep breath, trying to contain the fury that was rising up his spine. "Can't you do anything right, Wallace?" The prosecutor didn't answer. He knew Montero was furious, but there was something else. A silent fear. Camilla wasn't just any girl, and now she knew too much. Montero clenched his fists. "If she wants war, then let's give it to her." And that very night, Judge Montero decided to do something he hadn't done in years. The next day, he himself would step into the courtroom to face Camilla face to face. Camilla didn't sleep that night. The failed attack had proven that Montero was desperate. He knew she was too close to the truth. But that also meant he would make mistakes, and Camilla was ready to exploit them. Sitting in her makeshift office, she spread out all the documents she had collected on her desk. The report on Isaiah Carter's murder, the cases Montero had mysteriously dismissed over the years, the suspicious court decisions that always favored the city's powerful. And then, a pattern emerged. Montero wasn't just a corrupt judge, he was the linchpin of a much larger scheme. Influential businessmen, local politicians, even the police chief, they all profited from rigged sentences. Innocent people were convicted without evidence, while wealthy criminals got away with it. And if she played her cards right, she could bring them all down at once. The risky move. The next morning, Camilla walked into the courtroom as if nothing had happened. But something was different. Montero was there. He never attended Wallace's in-person hearings. But today, he sat behind the prosecutor, his cold eyes fixed on her. Camilla took a deep breath. Your Honor, I would like to present new evidence. Wallace rolled his eyes. This is absurd. Your client already has a weak defense and now you want to divert attention with unfounded allegations? Camilla ignored Wallace and continued. The documents I have show that the defendant, Samuel Carter, was arrested without concrete evidence, but they show something even more troubling. She walked over to the defense table and pulled out a manila envelope. These are records of previous cases tried by Judge Montero. They all follow a pattern. She handed the copies to the court. Here are decisions that benefited defendants with ties to local businessmen and politicians. And here, a report of a case filed 10 years ago, in which my client's brother was killed under suspicious circumstances. Montero remained motionless, but Camilla noticed something subtle. A muscle in his jaw twitched. Enough of this nonsense. Wallace slammed his hand on the table. This lawyer is trying to distract the court with baseless accusations. Camilla smiled. If they are baseless, why is the prosecutor so nervous? Murmurs ran through the room. Montero leaned forward. You're playing with fire, girl. Camilla looked him straight in the eyes. And you finally realized that I'm not afraid of getting burned. The move was made. Now it remained to see who would make the next move. The courtroom was packed. News of the charges against Judge Montero had spread like wildfire. People from the city, journalists, and even lawyers who had previously feared the judge were there, anxious to see the outcome of the battle. Montero, sitting on the bench, kept his face impassive, but Camilla could see the signs. The firm grip on his hands, the eyes that avoided prolonged contact, the controlled breathing. He was cornered. And when a man like him feels cornered, he becomes more dangerous. The decisive moment, Camilla stood up, walked slowly to the center of the room, and looked directly at the jury. For years, this court has worked like a relentless machine. People came in innocent and left guilty. Cases were shelved without explanation. And there was always a name behind these decisions. Alvaro Montero. Montero banged the gavel. This is an affront. There is no evidence against me. Camilla opened a manila envelope and took out a document. This is the report of a case from 1962. Do you remember Isaiah Carter? The silence in the room was piercing. Montero's face darkened. This has nothing to do with this trial. It has everything to do with it. You helped cover up the death of an innocent young black man. A case without investigation, without witnesses heard. Now, years later, you are about to convict his brother in the same way. Montero stood up, his face red with fury. Enough of this farce. Camilla took a second document and held it up for everyone to see. And here are records of payments deposited into your account. Amounts coming from companies whose owners were acquitted in this court. Amounts that you accepted to sell sentences. The room exploded in murmurs. Wallace, next to Montero, turned pale. He backed away slowly, realizing he was sinking along with the judge. Montero instinctively pulled back the gavel as if he could restore order by force. That's a lie. I am the law in this court. Camilla approached the bench. No, Your Honor. The law is greater than you. The silence was absolute. Montero felt the weight of those words. For the first time, he realized he had lost. Camilla turned to the jury. This isn't just about this case. This is about what's right. The difference between power and justice. The court exists to protect the innocent, not to enrich the powerful. The jury foreman exchanged glances with the other members before finally saying, Mr. Judge, we ask for your immediate removal from this trial. Montero sat down, defeated. Justice was finally about to be served. The Fairbrook courtroom had never been so quiet. All eyes were on Judge Montero, who for the first time was not in control of the situation. On the opposite side, Camilla stood imposingly. She had faced a corrupt system and come out on top. But she knew that there was still one last step left. The courtroom door opened and 2 police officers entered. The Fairbrook sheriff, who had always remained neutral until then, walked up to Montero and stopped next to him. Alvaro Montero, You are being investigated for corruption, rigging of sentences, and obstruction of justice. We will have to take you in for questioning." Montero, red with anger, clenched his fists. "This is an outrage. I am the law in this city." Camilla crossed her arms. "No, you were the law. Now you will answer for your crimes like any other man." Montero turned to Wallace, waiting for the prosecutor to say something. But Wallace just hung his head, feeling the weight of his own cowardice. He knew that if he said anything, he would fall with them. The police handcuffed Montero. The judge looked around, hoping to find an ally, someone who would stand up for him, but he found only indifferent faces. His reign was over. The final trial. A few days later, the Fairbrook court reconvened. But this time, Montero was not on the podium. He was in the dock. Camilla was present, but not as the prosecution's attorney. She had already done her part. Now it was up to the system to decide the fate of the man who once thought he was untouchable. The jury found Montero guilty, and upon hearing the prison sentence, the former judge just hung his head. Justice had been served. The farewell that night. Camilla walked through the quiet streets of Fairbrook. She passed the courthouse, now a symbol of change. When she arrived at Lucy's diner, the woman greeted her with a tired smile. "You did it, girl." Camilla took the cup of hot coffee Lucy placed in front of her and blew on the steam slowly. "I did what needed to be done." Lucy sat down next to her. "What now? Are you staying in the city?" Camilla looked out the window, watching the flashing lights of the diner's sign. "No, my fight here is over, but there are many other battles to fight." She finished her coffee, left some folded bills on the counter, and stood up. As she left the diner, she felt the cool wind touch her face. It wasn't revenge, it was justice, and that was enough. The end.